Hey everyone. Given just a second to make sure we've got audio set up. Hey Gunjan, how are you?
Hey Molly, good. How are you?
Good. All right. We'll give people just a few minutes to click in because I know sometimes when we go from AirMeet to LinkedIn, get a little bit of a delay there, but really excited to have you here today. And for those who maybe this is your first WTF, thanks for joining and make sure you use the chat, right? I think the importance of these sessions are not to just listen to us talk, right? It's to get your questions answered, hear from, either somebody who has similar experience or, a career topic or something that you're interested in learning more on. That's why we're here. So use the LinkedIn comment section from the event or on the right hand side of AirMeet if that's how you've joined. There's the chat there. So we're going to dive in just from a housekeeping perspective. We are going to wrap up about 15 minutes early today, so I'm going to not waste any time to make sure we can get questions answered and go through all of my questions as well, but just want to keep everyone up to speed on that. So this is a fun one, right? So we talk a lot about these sessions about community. And so, I've met tons of great people in operations through community, but I think Gunjan and I have like a very very interesting story on how we met because we actually met through an operations community. At the time, I was working for a company as an enterprise data architect on a revenue operations team. We were looking to hire our first CS ops person. I posted in a community chat, said, "Hey, we've got this role open." Got a ping from some random person. We started talking. She got hired. Eventually, started reporting to me, and it's been history ever since. But like, one of the things that again I love about Rev Genius and all the communities out there is like you make relationships with this like this. And when I think CS Ops, this is who I think. So I'm gonna let you introduce yourself, and then we'll dive in.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, Molly. Yeah, so you kind of started the intro off right there really well. I got introduced into the world of RevOps thanks to you. Actually, like prior to that, I had this kind of sense of CS and the concept of CS systems. I actually started my career in sales, and I was good at it. I just didn't really like the sales part. I used numbers, I used different elements of different software to help me be good at it, but I really just didn't like the actual job. Decided to try customer success, the other side of that customer facing journey. And again, I was good at it. I loved some customers, others not so much. We are very similar to most CSMs. I think I just wasn't set up for success. I was being given a lot of accounts, mostly low spend, but there were those oddballs that I helped grow really well. And it was just I didn't have the right tooling to guide me. There was no standardization. There was no real focus on adoption or what's the right metric. It was just go get the renewal. Like we were even asked to forecast, and it was a judgment call, a gut feeling of renewable ARR. We had Gainsight, but it wasn't really set up well. And our CSM from Gainsight was trying to get it to become sticky, interviewing a few of us, and I just loved that conversation. Shout out to Elliot Halverson at Gainsight, who's now a manager of enterprise CSMs over there. I love that conversation. It changed my life, and I wanted to get into that world. I decided I wanted to actually go try to be a CSM at Gainsight. I interviewed for that role. I was told I wasn't a good fit. Nick, you should check that out. I'm never gonna forget that conversation. And luckily, I found ValueWise, which is a consulting company focused on CS strategy and technology. They took a chance on me, and I was able to learn Gainsight administration and how to approach it alongside CS strategy and design all on the job. So I was across 5 different instances and really just getting a crash course, learning from some of the best who I'm still friends with today. And I even got a chance to learn about other customer success platforms like Tatango there as well. From there, I moved to owning my own system on your team. And I learned a lot from you on how to think about CS Ops in the wider RevOps umbrella and just how integral that is in an organization. Since then, I've been able to build out CS systems teams at ZoomInfo and now doing the same at Amplitude, both under a wider business systems umbrella, working with a sister strategy and ops organization to help operationalize CS and help our customer-facing teams win. So with each step of that journey, I'm kind of expanding that experience more and more to really kind of think about how does this work in the enterprise world? How do we go beyond Gainsight, go into CS systems, go into the the wider lens of business systems as a whole. So that's a little bit about
No, I
me.
love that. And I laugh, right? Because there's two things that I always appreciate about your story that I'm going to call out and, maybe embarrass you a little bit, right? But the
Oh
first one
no.
is you started as a BDR, right? Like, that's really where you started. And one of the things that, or an SDR, right? In sales, and then moved to CS. And I think, they don't teach revenue operations in college. They don't teach Gainsight in college. They don't teach Salesforce in college, right? Like, everyone has to start somewhere. And I think, your ability to come into an organization and, move between functions, right? And take maybe that non-linear career path, but where you saw a need, where you saw a gap, and it fueled kind of like your fire and your fulfillment, I think is just super, super helpful. And I always, people talk to me about like, how do I make a career change from, being a BDR to operations? And, one of the things, and I'd love to get your opinion on this, is I look at this in like two buckets, right? Like, you either are a domain expert or the business, right? And then the other one you can teach. So if you are trying to change, being able to find those opportunities in your current organization where the business makes it a lot easier to be able to make those switches. I know that that's not always the case and not always an opportunity, but those are like truly, that's how you can really break into ops a lot easier. Otherwise, to the second point, somebody had to take a chance on you, right? And I laugh because, Gainsight didn't hire you, and I'm sure they probably have regretted that since, because I know that you are, a huge champion. In my situation, Marketo did hire me, right? And I did go and, like, where you're CS ops, I've kind of started in the marketing ops place, and it's, diving in. And, one of the things that I'd love to learn is like, how did you go from tool administration kind of like back into really getting more of like the strategic, right? So like, I always want to shake people when they're like, revenue operations is Salesforce, and you probably want to shake people when they're like, CS operations is Gainsight, right? So how do you break that, right? And like, how have you broken that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it comes over time. It needs some convincing. If we focus entirely on Gainsight as an example, what about the enablement of Gainsight? What about that adoption? What are we even putting into it? Right? No technology is going to solve a strategy problem. No technology is going to solve an enablement problem. I look at it as a trifecta. To really be successful, we need to get the strategy right, we need to get the enablement right, and the technology is just the middle piece. It's just the visual. It truly will not solve a strategy problem. And so, like, the way that I try to approach any sort of new process or enhancement, or just entire platform implementation, is kind of taking a step back and saying, what are we actually trying to do here? What are we trying to solve for? What are the challenges that we're facing? And it sounds like a lot of that fluffy stuff that an onboarding team wants to outline, like, right, what are our value drivers? Like, what are the metrics behind this? It is so important to get that, because at the end of the day, the easiest thing to put a dollar line item next to when it comes to cutting costs and this economic downturn that we're in, it's systems. It's really easy. Just make a list. Okay, Gainsight costs this much, Salesforce costs this much, and Zendesk costs this much, and all right, what can we cut? What can we consolidate? Now, the thing is, that doesn't tell us, well, what's the ROI we're getting from each of these pieces? And we can't tell that ROI story without understanding what were we trying to solve for to begin with. How are people using this? How integral is this to the CSICs day to day?
Yeah.
So I think it really just comes with convincing people that we need to think about this beyond the system, and really the system design should be fourth or fifth in the journey. We need to start with understanding current state. We need to understand measuring that current state and what future state needs to look like. Business design needs to come first.
I mean, I always talk, and I feel like I beat a dead horse when I say this, but like, people process data technology, right? Like, at the end of the day, technology works for process works for people. If you don't have the first two P's in the mix, like, you're doing it backwards and making things harder on yourself. And when you start to have those conversations, like, you shouldn't be just buying technology to buy technology, right? There should be a clear ROI. It should be defined. You should know how it's augmented, and it should align to the strategy. And I see so many organizations where the technology is the strategy versus the technology is supporting the strategy, right? And maybe that's shiny object syndrome, but you see that a lot. And as both systems people, I think we'd probably categorize ourselves in love for the tech and tooling. For me, it's a cognizant effort that I really do have to step back, because like there are tons of tools that I'd love to buy and love to use and like love to have, but if they don't fit with the business and I don't have the right case for it, I shouldn't have them. Same thing with like evaluating path. We had a really good initial question, so I'm gonna ask you this one, right? What's the difference between CS ops and revenue operations, right? And where do those fit together?
Yeah, great question. So to me, RevOps is it says my connection might be interrupted. Am I good? Am I here?
You're here. It says mine
Okay.
is too. So I think we'll keep going. I still hear you as long
All
as
right.
you still hear me.
Perfect. Yeah, we're good then. All right. So I look at RevOps as the powerhouse of any go-to-market organization. In my opinion, any CRO, any CFO should be focused on how efficient is the RevOps organization, because without it, those go-to-market teams don't know what to focus on. Ultimately, they will burn out trying to figure out what to focus on, when to focus on it, and how to focus on it. It's the activities, processes, and systems that come together to just bring life, right, to an overall integrated strategy that is unique to every business. And I think driving home the point that Sarah brought up in the chat as well, any systems person should be able to think about the strategy. They should be able to think about how does a business function so that they can support them in putting their best foot forward in just incredibly competitive marketplace, and ultimately grow net revenue and profitability year over year. What that breaks down to is typically in this concept of pillars or different parts of the customer life cycle, going back to marketing, sales, CS, and there might be elements within those. There should be elements within those.
Right.
And so CS ops in particular, I want to say CS, not CSM. It goes far beyond the CSM. If we think about anything that the customer engages with, that's what CS ops should be focusing on. It's everything from those individual account managers to that tech touch model for the long tail of customers, to community, to support, to professional services. Anything that the customer interacts with should be part of that CS ops world. Now, that doesn't mean that everything should necessarily fall into the CS ops team or systems
Right.
team. There should be conversation there. There should be strong alignment there. When we start to think about how RevOps puts it all together, think about the types of activities that kind of span across those pillars. So customer marketing is a great example. That is surefire to fail if there is not alignment between CS and marketing ops, just as an example.
Yeah.
So hopefully that helps answer your question, Nikia.
No, I think that is a great explanation. And, one of the things I'm going to ask you, and I think, I always joke like the tagline for RevOps is it depends. I think that's the tagline for all ops, right? Because it depends, right? It depends on the business, it depends on the situation, it depends on lots of things. But when you think about, a lot of and it's not we just like to throw words on things, but like PLG, right? Product led growth is like, I'm like, it's hot, right? But it's always been there, right? Like people are just leaning into it a little bit more. Does CS operations own PLG, right? Or is that product ops? And what's the thoughts there, right? And I mean, if you say it depends, I'm just going to be like, yeah, I know. But I'd love your opinion there.
It does depend, and it's just interesting that you asked me that, because I'm now at Amplitude, which is, in very biased opinions here, like I'm not going to say
Yes.
the, but a very, very strong leader in PLG and supporting
Right.
the model of PLG. And so that's all I've been hearing, right, since starting to onboard January 4th.
That's why I asked, because I was like, she's gonna have a hot take. So I've been waiting for this.
Yeah, I mean, I think PLG is something that ultimately, in my opinion, should be owned by a product ops sort of organization that works very closely in conjunction with CSOps and more. I think it depends on your SaaS model as well, right? We have a freemium model, and so those kind of upgrading from our starter package, that's something that kind of spans both CS and sales ops, right? Are we thinking about free customers as customers? Maybe not. I think it depends on each business, and so that's kind of where it blurs the lines a little bit, and where again that umbrella of RevOps is so important for that cross-functional alignment on any activities that could touch those free customers versus paying customers, and like what does that overlap look like? How do we approach any sort of initiatives that would span marketing, product, CS, sales? So it depends. you
Yeah.
hit the nail on the head.
I mean, I always like to ask, and I think it's good perspective, right? And it's less about like what the right answer is. It's more about how you get to the answer. I think as we all have a lot of experience and have worked in multiple organizations, like there's no one size fits all, right? It's how do you make the decision. Another kind of like hot take question I want to ask as well is like, we talk about what is CS ops, what isn't CS ops, right? So when you are, sitting around and like, what's a common stereotype or, that comes to you and you're like, no, really, this really isn't CS ops, right? Your definition's wrong, your thoughts are wrong.
The Gainsight admin, that's not CS ops.
Yeah.
The Gainsight, like I specifically say because first off, it goes beyond Gainsight. There are many other CSPs out there. But the work that goes into that spans so many other systems. Like if we, again, go back to the idea of everything that a customer interacts with, everything that a customer touches, that's CSOps. It's working across those systems and strategies and business stakeholders to centralize all customer-related activities and motions. And so what isn't CSOps is hyper-focusing on a single team or a single system. It's not supporting CSMs. It's not supporting support, right? It is a healthy mix of anything customer related.
Gainsight's not a strategy.
Exactly.
Gainsight's a tactic, right? And when we, and it's
operationalize that strategy, and it's correct, not limited to Gainsight to operationalize that strategy. It really so one of the reasons I joined Amplitude was I have this opportunity to build a team that is not just focused on Gainsight, right? We're planning. We've got stuff in the works on using all our different CS systems to work effectively to create a unified customer experience. So this is spanning to systems like Salesforce, like SkillJar, Mavenlink, Zendesk. Like it's not limited to Gainsight, and I think that's that next stepping stone for me is really expanding beyond a single platform. I mean, there were interactions with different systems before, but now there is that clear ownership.
Well, I think and the thing that I like that you said here, right? It's that unification, and we think about, and when I talk about, RevOps, this is my hour a week I get to soapbox to an audience. So I try to take advantage of it. Is like, I hate the word revenue in RevOps, right? I want to call it experience operations, because at the end of the day, if we build the right customer experience, if we build the right seller experience, like the revenue follows. But when I look at what I try to do, and when I hear what you're talking about, it's like, it's the experience, right? It's not only our users' experience and how they're executing on their processes within platforms to drive the best customer experience possible, how they're using data. And, I know back at Granular, we talked a lot about this, like a dashboard is quite frankly BS, right? Until it's actionable. So how do you make data actionable from aggregation to actionability? And that's where I look at how operations can come into play to help, disseminate and really strategize around that. So I think that is super, super impactful and super important. And I think we have very similar philosophies on this, but it's great to hear how you're not the Gainsight admin. You're not the, Tatango admin. It's, we're looking across the ecosystem against the experience. And I think, props to Amplitude and props to your strategy there to really really think that way, because I do think that is transformational vision and how people think about things. When you think about kind of, what's next, right? So I always, all right, RevOps is cool now. We're the hip new thing, and CSOps, becomes like the part. What happens next? Like, what is the next thing that we look at, we take on, we grow into? Like, how do you see? I bucket RevOps because I do think CSOps is like CSOps is a pillar of revenue operations. Like, revenue operation, CSOps is not revenue operations. They're all, they work together, whether it's a team or mindset. But so when I say that, just to clarify with the audience that they're not like, this lady is crazy, but like, what are we doing next with ops, right? How does this evolve?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think looking at just the types of challenges that we're facing these days with the economy, not just recent months, but just recent years. It's ever important to make sure that we're constantly focusing on profitability and the right investments of our various resources. And part of that, I think, is this new world where there are so many uh, possible systems, possible options here for driving our CRM, our marketing strategy, our CS strategy, driving, operationalizing, not developing, I will say. But I see it growing beyond those core systems, like the clear winners in the space, like Salesforce, Marketo, Gainsight. I truly see more competition, and in the RevOps world, we really need to think about, are we constantly just going to those clear winners because they've been the clear winners, or are there truly these up and coming type of systems and tools and platforms that we can use to help drive down that cost and increase profitability? I think that question is going to start coming up more and more from our CROs, our CFOs, and we're going to have to, evaluate. We're going to have to really think about, are we spending these dollars right? And I think most of us are going to be really uncomfortable with that.
I mean, it's that whole, I laugh because it's, the theme has been do more with less, right?
Yeah.
And so, and this is actually something I was going to ask you, like, when you are buying a platform, right, or a product, one of the things that I think about is, not only what does this replace in the stack and what can this do, but, am I looking at a point solution, or am I looking at a platform approach, right? And like, how do I do that? So I'd love to get your thoughts on, like, how do you bridge out of that comfort zone and like really evaluate not only your tech stack that you have today, but also like what tomorrow looks like?
Yeah. As a manager, it starts with, basically what James is alluding to in the chat here, delineating from specific tools. I don't know if you remember, but when I was coming over to Granular, I specifically said that, hey, I don't want Gainsight in my title, like, just in case, something changes. If Gainsight
Did I tell you no?
Andrew told me no.
Okay, I was like, I felt like I had a little influence in that conversation, and I think I was like, I don't think you really want that.
Yeah, well, but the point there really is, if Gainsight is dropped, does that mean my job is dropped, right? If I'm a Salesforce admin and Salesforce is dropped, does that mean that my job is dropped, right? It starts with just like those little things that can actually end up working very positively when it comes to the expansion of that strategy, to hit different systems and to really rely on being able to get into different systems. I've had in the past, people tell me, "Oh, you're just the Gainsight admin. Why are you touching Salesforce?" You might have been one of those people. I don't know. I'm kidding.
No, you're probably breaking something.
I was in there. No, I broke stuff.
I'm kidding.
Everyone breaks stuff. But anyway, I think with this new world, when it comes to just evaluating what we're doing, one of the biggest or most frequent, I should say, projects that anybody in RevOps goes through is consolidation and reducing tech debt, and that really is because of a lot of random miscellaneous little tools that have been purchased over time. And when we need to cut costs, we're like, okay, well, why didn't we
Well,
just do this thing in the existing system that like we could have that has the same functionality?
and as your business evolves, right? Like your tooling and your tech should evolve. And
Yep.
maybe it evolves or de-evolves, right? Like realistically, unless you're, working at a 50-year-old company that's like never changing what they're doing, like
Hmm.
things are adjusting, right?
Yeah.
And so you need to be constantly reevaluating your tech, right? And one of the things that I look at, each quarter I look at usage, right? That is, at a minimum, I try to understand usage by role and see like, are we using it? Or if we're not, what has changed? Why this tool that we historically saw usage on has changed? And that
Yeah.
starts to be kind of a leading indicator of like, I might need to do some probing. I need to do some, research on that.
Yeah.
Because I think the average typical SaaS company has, I think, 150 different tools across, their whole organization. So, realistically, as I, run process and systems here at Deal, there's about 60 that sit in
Yeah.
my general domain. Some are really small, some are really big, right? But
Yeah.
it's still a tool. It still is, at the end of the day, touching an experience or supporting an experience.
Yeah, it comes back to that trifecta, I think, right? Like when initially thinking about how a platform is going to be adopted, it comes down to ensuring that the processes support that usage, support that adoption. So, like at Granular, we got CSMs out of Salesforce. So if they wanted any information about their day to day, they had to go to Gainsight. They had to operate out of there. At ZoomInfo, we had comp tied directly to health scores in Gainsight. And so again, like if they wanted to get paid, they had to do their stuff out of Gainsight. So like it's really strategizing that up front. Now, if I had approached it from a strictly like, oh, let's get Gainsight off the ground perspective, most likely adoption would not be as strong as it was. But this was because of a strong collaboration between strategy, enablement, and technology. But generally, like to as RevOps as a whole, to truly be effective and not be a cost center, RevOps should be owning and driving that strategy across any systems that primarily GTM teams use to help navigate those day-to-day activities, even the smallest ones, even those smallest activities of like, how
Yeah.
do I don't know, track just my gut feeling on this account? There's just so much possible, and I'm sure there's some tool that does specifically that ask. I'm sure there is. If someone asks me if hey, can I go buy this, I will surely say no.
Right, because it's like, and it's the fine line, and I think this is a good segue, and is like, any tool you bring, has to support the process. We know all that, but has to be administered, right? Like
Yeah,
there is a capital factor to tooling and
yeah,
tech. And you might be like, oh yeah, but we set it up and forget it. And it's like, but who manages the renewal? Who monitors this? Who makes sure, the compliance, the regulation, the data security, all of that stuff is in place, the things you don't really think about, but, keep me up at night for, all the tools that we have to think about. And so, making a smooth segue into talking about, again, a common trend that comes up with ops, prioritization, right? I know we know this one. How do we focus on the right things when the fires are burning all around us, right? And like, I'd love to hear more about, how do you think about prioritization? How do you balance like BAU, business as usual, with, large strategic initiatives? And like, what have you found that works well for you? What have you found that like, where you're trying to even just develop more in?
yeah. That's a great question. Um, I look
I'm
at
hoping
it.
to learn from this answer because I feel like I could still grow and develop here. So lay it
I think
on
we
me.
all can. We all can at all times. And this is it's a really hot topic for me right now because we're trying to establish that intake process like more systematically right now.
Mhm.
Um, I think it starts with, like you said, like BAU is one thing, ongoing project work is another thing. And it starts with evaluating like what what capacity are we allocating to each of those efforts? Because just because we have a major project going on doesn't mean we can just forget about the day-to-day stuff. We can't just
Yeah, the business doesn't stop, right?
exactly, exactly. And so setting that fine line and sticking to it. It is so easy to say, okay, I know I said 60-40, but like this is a really heavy week. We're getting close to go live. Like, I'm going to make it 80-20. No, like, it starts with setting that hard line and sticking to it. From there, so I'll talk about the BAU stuff, not really the project work.
Yeah.
I look at it as a combination of a few factors to make that decision. Like, first is level of impact, right? Is this some sort of enhancement that a single user or very small subset of users is looking for? And how much is it really going to improve their day to day? How much is it really going to improve their lives? Then level of effort. An additional column in a report. Okay, yeah, maybe it's a low level of impact, but it's such a low level of effort. I can do that, frankly, while watching Netflix. And I've done that many times.
And I can record a loom and show them how to do it, right? And like then I'm teaching people how to fish.
Yeah, right. Then there's urgency. Where is this coming from? And is there a specific additional deadline related to it? That might actually come back to project work. That might be related to project work for other pillars, other verticals that I'm not directly involved in, but I know it will slow down or prevent that project work. And so it's this combination of those three things, right? Level of impact, level of effort, and overall urgency. I think about those three factors to figure out an overall priority. And I think that's the biggest thing is, like, I don't want to ask my business stakeholders what they think the priority is, because everything is a P1. Everything's a P1. Yeah. And that makes it impossible for me to look at, okay, that's a P1 for the CSM group, but support's got this other thing, education's got this other thing, professional services, in the grand scheme of things, I think it's more like a P5.
If everything's a priority, nothing is a priority, right?
Exactly.
And I think, even just, and I this has always kind of made sense, but like it just really clicked for me right now, right? Like, even though you're CS, the way you just said that, how many different departments you have within CS, right? It's not just the CSMs, right? You said support, you said enablement, you said training, you said, you have account management, you'll have all of these things, right? And so, how do you steer that when it comes to those priorities, right? And I liked your approach of, like, I don't ask them what their priority, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
But at some point you have to validate those priorities across the group, because there's one of your team and probably 5 of them. So the ratio, we already have the wrong ratio, but that's a whole other conversation. But how do you manage those expectations and, like, actually force them to align, right? Because that's so much of our work is, like, cross-functional, and I left, not even cross-functional, right? In function alignment in your case, just cross-stakeholder, cross-team.
Yeah. So again, great question. This is where, like, company values and company structure around goal setting is really important. Ultimately, I will try to first go back and evaluate priorities based on what directly aligns to a company goal or a departmental goal, and use that to drive it. And if there's still that cluster of, okay, I've got 3 or 5 story points worth of capacity left in this sprint, here's like the 5 different sort of issues that are probably next up. This is where I'll go back to my sister org, strategy and operations, and have the strategy and operations partners for each of those verticals. I'll kind of have them tell me, this is what's left. You tell me amongst yourselves what is the most important. Oftentimes I'll be in that conversation, and oftentimes what it is okay, this one directly ties to comp, and it's a little bit more urgent, and it's got this particular due date or timing. So, like, let's try to emphasize this one. They can figure it out amongst each other just fine, but I try to make that call of funneling it out to these ones are definitely the most important. So let me focus on those. It just comes down to understanding how it all aligns with ongoing motions that support the day-to-day, but are not necessarily part of those overarching company or departmental goals. I think the big thing there, right, is if it's going to completely interrupt or stop day-to-day functions, that immediately goes to the front of the list, right? And I'm not going to say it's a bug. It could be a bug. It could not be a bug. But if it needs that little
You
bit
got
of
to figure it out, right?
yeah, exactly. We can't, like you said, business doesn't stop functioning, and if there is an issue that is preventing them from being able to do their day to day, that immediately is going to take the cake.
Right. And I mean, and that, I think back about like expectation setting is so critical, and like how you communicate those things, right? Because it's not always like, well, why didn't, it's like, why didn't that big thing get done on time? Well, because these 50 other things came up, and we could spend a bunch of time documenting that and managing that and like communicating that. And I think sometimes that is what shoots us in the foot a little bit as ops professionals, is we don't disseminate that information back always articulately to kind of the executives, to the stakeholders, because we're already on to the next thing. And so like, being really purposeful on the trade-offs, on the decisions, on the sign-offs, on, why we're doing what we're doing or what had to happen, is super important. When you think about product, right? Product goes down, all hands on deck, and that's the expectation. But like Salesforce goes down, it's like, what'd you do? Right.
Well, I think
kind of
a couple things that's making me think of as well, and it kind of echoes Sarah's most hearted comment here as well. We need to act as product managers. We need to think as product managers, and that goes beyond the day-to-day operation, the prioritization, and everything. You mentioned a word in there that I'm proving it by saying this is often forgotten: documentation. We need to allocate the time to document what we did, what's going on, how things are working, even if it's just that internal technical documentation, so that the rest of the business systems or RevOps team knows what's going on and what fields, gain sites, connectors depend on in Salesforce. And when they make updates to that field, they let us know as well. That is just so key to making that cross-functional systems team work. I see Laura on the chat here. She's in my cross-functional team, and she's awesome. And I think that's something that any organization can do better. Like just getting that documentation rhythm down. And in my opinion, it should be part of the sprint. It's like a ticket is not done until the documentation is done.
And build it, and like, on our team here, Bridget on my team has done a great job of change management, building it right within our process and our ticket, right? You're finishing a ticket, you're moving something. What was the current state? What's now the future state? Right. And getting it right somewhere where people can find, you can identify. And I can easily go back and look. And I always laugh. And for anyone who has kids out there, you might get this, like the best forcing function of documentation is going on extended leave. And that's when you realize how much is in your brain.
Yeah.
And so, as you think, especially for like the RevOps teams of one and the smaller teams and like the CSF, the smaller operations teams, if you want to grow, documentation is going to be so critical as you hire and onboard and train and manage new people, that you're giving them the right experience, right? It's not just word vomit. You've got this in place. You're able to grow this. You can go on vacation and like enjoy your time, because the CEO is not going to call you when they can't get logged into Salesforce. They still might, but like, this is such an important thing to remember. And I love that you brought that up. We've got a couple questions because I know we're about 7 minutes before wrap up. One question was sales ops versus CS ops. What's the difference?
Well, I will start with saying sales ops is often interchangeably used with RevOps. That is wrong, because revenue is not just a sales number. That was my introduction to RevOps, right? It was just a sales ops team. And anytime I had asked questions on, well, how do I pull this for like CS and retention? I don't know. Well, why not? Aren't you supposed to know? Your revenue ops. This is revenue. And they're like, I don't know. I think, so the question specifically was that leadership is unfamiliar with CS, and they don't know what CS is versus sales to begin with, let alone ops. I would say to that, run. If your leadership doesn't know the difference between sales and CS, run. Fundamentally right now, the whole purpose of CS is, if a business stopped selling new business, the company should still be growing. That's the definition of CS. We're doing it so well. The product is good. How we cater to customers is so good that that net retention is still greater than 100%, and we are profitable. That's good CS. So, like, it is much easier to grow existing customers in any space than it is to acquire new customers. Just think about the competition.
I mean that's the age old math, right? It's easier to retain than acquire. Like we talk, I mean, that's been business books since I was in college, right? Like I don't see that changing.
I don't see that changing. I don't see that changing. And so from an ops perspective, ideally that ratio of resources and focus should mimic that. We have more customers than we have people that we're hoping to acquire or are on track to acquire as new customers. So our resources should likely be allocated that way too. Now that's not the case. I don't think I've seen that anywhere. But that's where I see this world going. That's where I see RevOps going, really, is just more and more of an investment in CS ops and doing it well.
No, I think that I smile, right? Because like in my mind, CS operations, and then on the counterpart, I see SDR operations as two of kind of like these two levers that I don't think we put the right necessary investment in. The hot ones are marketing and sales, but you've got kind of the the middle of the sandwich, and then the end of the funnel that necessarily don't always get the same, I'm going to say, love and attention. But if you think about it, those are the two ones that have the most impact to like your customer experience, your brand, right? Your outbound SDRs are generally like your face of your company, things that aren't acquired by inbound. They're your voice of your messaging and your sequencing. They're that first impression. And then you've got your CS, which is your relational. Yeah.
Think about it beyond that with product, right? How many engineers does product get? And still, like, let's face it, no product is ever going to completely sell itself, completely renew itself, completely just manage itself post-sale, right? It may not need people. I will say that. It may not need people.
Yeah.
But it
does need infrastructure and process.
Yeah. And like that's why I really wanted to emphasize that CS Ops is not just about supporting the CSM. In fact, most of the customers that CS Ops supports are not managed by a CSM collectively, globally, right? It goes far beyond that. And we need to be able to think, again, like product managers, we need to be able to have that lens of marketers. We need to be able to have that lens of product ops, of engineers, of sales. Like CS is so much more than just talking to a customer. We need to have these different perspectives and different hats that we wear.
No, absolutely. And I think that that's just such a good perspective to say. And I laugh because it's like, we're not just this, right? And I think getting that really clearly defined. I know we have 2 minutes left. So any final thoughts, any parting things that you didn't get to say that you wanted to say while you have this forum and you have this piece?
Just going back to like
preach.
Yeah, just going back to like the non-standard careers thing, right? CS Ops is a world that a lot of different types of people can get into. I know former SDRs, CSMs, IT, like hardware security people. I don't even know what that world looks like, but IT people, network security people. I've seen people from education, and it just comes back to this fact that it is more than just talking to customers. There's some element that anybody could have in order to get into CS Ops. Like you said as well, there's no university program or college program teaching how to get into CS Ops, how to get into the world of Gates admin, how to get into the world of RevOps. So if it's something that piques your interest, like definitely lean into that because it's the best decision I ever made.
What would you recommend for people who are like, this does pique my interest? What are good resources? I know we've got a minute, but like favorite resources out there and that people should check out.
Yeah, good question. Salesforce Trailhead has a lot of really great modules that go beyond Salesforce. That just get into the concepts, into just the learnings of how to think about how businesses function. So definitely, check that out. not saying go get a Salesforce certification, but definitely important. There's obviously the global Gainsight admins Slack community, which I co-founded, and it's just amazing to see the people in there. There's more than 2,000 people in there now, and the conversations in there are very, very useful for anyone currently in the role or just starting in the role. For people trying to get into it new, check out Gainsight's own community. It's community.gainsight.com. Lots of great resources for people looking to enter this world as well. Those are probably the main ones. To be honest, there's not a whole lot. And that's a problem that I'm looking to solve. So
Yeah.
that's why
No,
I'm
I
here.
mean, and that's where I think communities are so important. And I think that's, because of this lack of what I'd call of like formalized institutional knowledge around these developing topics, like we've got to rely on each other, rely on our networks, rely on our experience, and go from there. Well, thank you so much for joining today, and really appreciate the conversation. Always good to catch up, and have a good one.